So, in my last video, I talked about how I used a different sort of framework for my remote events and functions. And I asked if you guys wanted to see a video on it, and a few people said yes. So, this is that video. And basically, this video is going to be showcasing my very own remote messenger module. And this module is meant to be abstracted and used in all of your other scripts to communicate with remote events and remote functions. And the reason I made this module is because when I was making my games, I found that my scripts got very cluttered with remote event and function definitions all throughout the scripts, and it just like made the top variable area really cluttered and long and sort of confusing when I was using those variables because my naming conventions weren't very good in the first place. So that's where I created this module. And incidentally, this module is actually very secure when it comes to exploits because it uses a command system that only allows things to be run on the server when the client calls with a certain string keyword. So it's basically like a password system, which it's not impenetrable, but it'd be kind of hard to just out of the blue guess a certain command. So I'm going to be showing this module, the link for the downloads in the description, but watch the video if you want to see how it works and the API usage. It's heavily commented, so you might not need it, but the video is there if you want it. So I hope you all enjoy. Let's get into the video. So let's start with the module itself. What I usually do is I have the module in the toolbox. I'll give you guys a link to it in the description. It says remote messenger. I take it, I already have it, you can see, and I drag it into replicated storage. Because since this deals with remote events and functions, we want it to be in replicated storage as much as possible. And you can see, let's just go take a quick look at the module. I have heavily commented this, and by the way, I made this module, so you should be able to see what's going on. And it's very simple. It just abstracts some stuff. And you'll notice I'm also using some type syntax with Luau, which right now is pretty experimental. Like, for example, there's really no way that I think for me to put multiple variables as argument function signature. But in the future, it'll work really well, especially when Roblox reworks their whole script editor, which I think they have planned for next year. So basically, the way this works is I have my remote messenger module, and I have two remotes in it: the get data remote function and the set data remote event. And when I use this module, these are the only two remote functions and events in my whole entire game. And the reason I did this is when I built games with like a bunch of remote events and a bunch of remote functions, they ended up being very cluttered, and like in the very top of the script, for example, there was just a bunch of random references to random events or whatever, and it just didn't work that well. So I created this module to combat that. And this is by no means like the best way to do this, but this is the way I figured out. And also, the way this module works is it uses a command system. So you can add a listener and then listen for it, and you can send data. So let me show you an example. Let me just go into that. I can't really explain it without showing it, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go into starter player scripts, and create a local script. Zoom in a little bit. There we go. I'm going to define replicated storage will be equal to game get service replicated storage. And I'm going to define my remote messenger, which will be able to require replicated storage, wait for child remote messenger. And you can obviously rename the module in your own game if you want. That's the best name I could find. It's honestly kind of crappy, but you can change it if you want. So now we have a remote messenger. You can do a bunch of things. First thing I want to do, I'm just going to copy this, go into server script service, and create, not a module script, and I want to create a normal script. So I'm just going to paste the same code so we have that. So what I'm going to do is on the local script, I'm going to call remote messenger dot send server. And send server takes in two needed parameters, or one needed parameter, and that is the command that you want to call on the server. So let's say I want to call a command that says do something. This is the command in string form that I want to call on the server. So if I were to run this right now, you can see I get a warning in the output. And so this is just for when you have an event and like something's not happening, you know it by saying it says nothing listening to do something. So there's no listeners listening to this command down here. So if I go to my server script and I get, say, remote messenger add listener to do something, and I can connect the function to it, and this function will get the player, and we can just print did something. So this will print out did something, and that's because what's happening behind the hood is, since we're requiring this module from both the client and the server, the client requires it, and then whenever we use the function send server, what's happening is, let me go find it real quick. Send server. We're using our remote event and we're invoking it on the server. And when the module is called, we have this little block down here that says if it's on the server, then on server event we want to connect to this function. And the reason there's an underscore here is because it's private. You should not use this function when you're dealing with the module. This function right here. And it does this for both remote events and remote functions, but we're going to stick to events right now. So I have my event little system right here. You can also pass in parameters. So let me zoom in. I can pass in a parameter of, let's say, instead of do something, let's say print message. That's my command, and the parameter will be my message, which will be hello world. And then in the server script, we can, instead of just getting the player, because it basically passes all of the data from the server to the client, or from the client to the server, like no matter what it is. And that's why I'm using these triple dots. That's just basically like a variable amount of arguments. This is super, super useful. If you're not using this for your Lua functions, you should be, because it's one of the key things about Lua. Like, you can do a bunch of variable stuff that other languages you can't do. So when we have it here, we can take in our player, and then we can take in our message, and then we can just say player.name said message. So it'll print my name, and it'll say, oh, never mind, I forgot to change. See, this is why this warning is so good, because I just realized I forgot to change do something to print message. So it says bricey said hello world. And the biggest thing about this system that I think, I did this unintentionally, but I feel like the system would be pretty hard to exploit, because most of the time exploits would work by just mindlessly searching through replicated storage, finding any remote events and remote functions, and just firing them, maybe with some random values, maybe not. But since we have to use a command system, even if it's not a string, because we check it in this client receive and server receive, I'll go into these in more detail a little bit later. It's basically just checking for the command, and if this is like a number, if this is nil, it won't do anything. Only way to run a function on the server from the client is to send a specific string value that corresponds with an active listener on the server, which that is very, very powerful. And unless someone got lucky and guessed the exact print message function, then you couldn't really do anything. And another cool thing about this is this works almost the same as an event connection. So I can say local listener equals remote messenger add listener. So this add listener functions returns a listener table, which, let me go up here. Here's the definition. It's like, it has a string for the command, a callback function, and stop listening. So stop listening is basically, let's do something where we say listener stop listening. This basically just stops the server from listening, and it just destroys everything in regards to that specific listener. So you can see before the client can call the server, the listener disconnects, which prevents the server from receiving the message. Which this works basically the same as a Roblox script signal, which that's like the local connection equals event connect to function. And you can see they're syntactically very similar as well, which is really nice. And along with this, we have our remote functions. So the way those work is, let me go back to the client and let me just delete this. So we're going to call a remote function. So we're going to say local value equals remote messenger get from server. And let's say we want to get a special value. Then we can go to the script on the server and we can say local listener equals remote messenger dot add listener special value function, which would get the player. And let's say our special value is 100. We can go to the local script and we can print value. And I'll explain this in a sec. Let me just run it. And you can see it prints 100. So way this is working is get from server is calling the remote function. But on the server side, it's syntactically identical to the remote event. And this makes it simpler when I was making the module, and it makes it a little simpler when you're coding it. The only problem is readability, but the commands should clear that up for you, and the return statements, because these events should not have return statements. And it works the same way, and in the module, it works basically the same way as well. So speaking of that, that's basically it for remote functions. They're the same as remote events. You just get a value. And they work the same way because this remote messenger just abstracts it. So I already showed you the add listener. This is pretty simple. It just creates a table with all these values, inserts it to a list of listeners, and then this list of listeners is sorted through whenever we get a remote event or remote function on the server or on the client. You can notice these functions are basically identical, and that's just because we need one on the client and we need one on the server. I mean, realistically, you could probably make them the exact same, but that would kill readability, I feel like, so I'm just going to leave them like that. And you can see when we require the module, this if statement is always called. I already went over this. And it just connects the server receive and client receive functions. And they basically, whenever they get an event or function, they just run through, call the callback of each listener, which was created up here. And then you got a bunch of the API functions over here. They're all pretty self-explanatory. I have these comments defining what they do. So if you guys want to use this module for yourself, there will be a link in the description. And I think it's written pretty well. It was a pretty simple project for me to make, and really, it's really not that crazy other than the fact that it's very, very safe when it comes to the messaging with like sanity checks, because the command system is basically a sanity check in and of itself. And if you don't know about that, make sure to watch my last video, which I talked about that. And yeah, but I think there's other, like, maybe better ways than this, such as, that's a weird glitch, such as, like, Knit, which is a framework I might start using, which uses a service and controller system to accomplish the same thing, except with the whole game framework, or not just remote events and functions. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was kind of more of a rant than an actual tutorial and a showcase, but I hope you enjoyed. I got a lot of comments on the last video saying they wanted to see this, and I am willing to share. I have a bunch of other modules. Actually, let me look at my toolbox. I got this mouse module that I created, a tween module, a draw module, an array module. So if you want to see any of these, make sure to comment down below, and I will make sure to showcase them, because they're a bunch of very simple but very powerful modules that I use in almost all my games. But other than that, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I hope you have a nice day, and goodbye.